So what's the deal on President Trump's visit to France? Let's loop in our panelists. With us here in the Beijing studio, we have Mr. Wang Yiwei, who is the director of the Institute of International Affairs at Renmin University. Sir, welcome to our program. Joining us in Clemson, South Carolina in the U.S., we invited David Woodard, who is a Clemson University political science professor and Republican consultant. Joining us in Taipei, we have a French guest, Barthelemy Courmont, who is a senior research fellow at the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs. I hope I pronounced your name right, sir. In Berlin, Germany, we have Mr. Henning Riecke, who is the head of the Transatlantic Relations Program, the German Council on Foreign Relations. Gentlemen, we have a very strong panel, and I want to begin with you. Professor Woodard, seems that both sides, the French president and the American president, they need something to show to home and abroad that they deserve the title that they have, don't they?
No, I don't agree. I think Trump is going to be pretty popular regardless of what happens in Paris. I think he'll be just fine no matter what happens. I don't think he needs an outcome.
All right. What about you, Mr. Courmont? For a liberal French, do you see the outcome the same as Professor Woodard, who is a Republican consultant?
Well, I think that both presidents are in a very different situation right now when it comes to their visibility and, let's put it this way, credibility at the world level. Macron was elected with a landslide just a couple of months ago, and he got a very high majority in the parliament a month later. He also appeared very consistent in all the public appearances he made at the international stage. And on the other side, Donald Trump is suffering from a lack of popularity in the rest of the world, and especially in Western Europe. And he also faces very difficulties at home if we refer to this Russian story that is poisoning the White House at the moment. So both presidents are in very, very different situation right now.
Professor Woodard, do you think the spotlight in Paris at the Bastille parade will be able to help President Trump to revitalize his image, at least abroad?
I don't think he's that concerned about his image abroad. There's been a recent poll here in the United States that showed that 42% of the people were afraid to travel in France because of a fear of a terrorist attack. I think he is beginning to articulate some concerns Americans have about the EU and also about France. And even though his popularity is below 50%, I don't think there's any doubt that he'll probably be strong through 2018 and run for a second term. So I don't see him as being in danger.
Professor Woodard is thinking long. What about you, Mr. Riecke? What about that possibility to winning some hearts and minds in Europe? At least convey the concerns of the Americans to the Europeans.
I mean, in Paris, there are, of course, two presidents looking for an outcome. Macron, who also invited Putin earlier to France, he wants to present himself as a leading figure in Europe, and he wants to, of course, ride on his wave of support. And I do believe that Trump felt awkward about the isolation he had during the G20, about the bad press he got during the G7 summit earlier. So to be treated as a statesman with the utmost amount of respect and pomp and circumstance, I think this is something that he can carry home and say, look, I'm internationally the leader that America used to be. But in the end, the Europeans, they will look for results. They will look for the climate accord, which is a bad precedent, and they hope that the accord survives. They will look at how the relationship with Russia is going, how the peace in Syria is going. So these are the topics that the Europeans have in mind.
Right. But we all know that earlier there have been some quote-unquote tug of war between the French president and the American president, at least when it comes to the format of handshake. French President Emmanuel Macron made the headlines for a so-called getting physical with Mr. Trump when they first met at the NATO summit, and when they met in a group at the G20 in Hamburg. At their meeting in Brussels, each president gripped the other's hands with considerable, let's just put it that way, intensity. Their knuckles turning white and their jaws clenching and faces tightening. At least that's what the media wants to describe them. And the G20, seconds after the photo opportunity with all leaders finished, Mr. Macron made a beeline towards President Trump and began speaking to him. The pair walked in private as Mr. Macron tapped the U.S. president on the chest. Well, a lot of physical actions over there. But the question is, I want to go to you, Mr. Courmont. President Macron has to rise above the so-called this little fiscal, tit for tat kinds of reactions and stories. He has to show his leadership. This is not enough just what the press has cooked. Can he really show his leadership when meeting with the biggest economy and certainly so-called leaders of the free world?
Well, I think this is a very interesting move from Emmanuel Macron. As you have mentioned, during the G7 summit, they had this physical interaction, which was highly symbolic. And I think that Macron wanted not only to show both Donald Trump and the rest of the world that he is in charge and that he is capable of some sort of leadership. I remind all of us that he's a very young leader. He's by far the youngest leader in the G7 and even the G20. He's only 39-year-old. But also, he had to reassure the French public opinion regarding the image of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is extremely unpopular in France. In the last poll, according to the last poll, only 14% of the French population trust Donald Trump. It is very far from the results of Barack Obama, for instance, who reached more than 80% when he was president. So there is an expectation in France among the population that our president must somehow represent this reassessment regarding the US president. And therefore, it was a highly symbolic gesture from him, not only to Donald Trump, but also to the French public opinion, and it was therefore a success. Yeah. On the other side, inviting Trump for this very important ceremony, if you want to compare with some other such events, you have to mention Moscow, Pyongyang, or Beijing. And to be honest with you, I don't think that Donald Trump is likely to attend any of these events in the near future. So it is a very symbolic gesture, and inviting Trump, this is the first time since Bush the father back in 1989 that a US president will be attending the 14th of July in France. So high pressure on Donald Trump, but also a very symbolic gesture, which is to show, look, we are your close friends. We are your partners. Nothing changes. I mean, we may have differences, but nothing changes. We still remain allies.
Okay, Professor Wang here in Beijing. The two leaders, I have to say, they have some common ground. They're all charismatic in their own ways. And their election road seems all to be, for many, surprisingly successful. But when they're coming together, they're seeking very different aspirations and messages to be conveyed in public. Do you think they will be in the same boat, or they're just going to talk to one another without really looking into each other's eyes?
I think there's more Macron's intention, want to invite President Trump to visit France and celebrate the anniversary.
Bastille Day.
I think because Mr. Macron was considered as the little Napoleon, so his ambitions is to go beyond the European Union as driving forces between together with the Angela Merkel. So to make up the relations, Atlantic relations, I think France need to take a leading role. Given that in the G20 and even before, Merkel, has some difficulties relations with Trump. So Macron want to I think it will be the bridge to connect United States and Europe again. Of course, for the President Trump, also they want to also improve the relations with Europe, and then Macron is, I think, the very important choice for him.
Mr. Riecke, what do you think?
I think that Trump is demanding of the Europeans a number of things that other presidents wanted as well. But Trump has played with the possibility that he might be able to walk away from the table. Now, if we now have higher defense spending, which is one topic that he insisted on quite a bit, it has not been because of Trump, it has been because of the risks around Europe, but he can cash that in as a success. But in the end, we talk about not only more spending, but willingness to get engaged in warfare, to use the military force. And I don't think that the Europeans have changed that much. So I think it will be an interesting question how Americans and Europeans see their interests align and walk out together to fight terrorism, to create stability. And I'm not sure that the Americans are really wanting that to be an international active player for international order anymore. And
Right.
this is a pity.
You know, Professor Wang, remember at the G20 or right after it, the EU leaders have been expressing their curiosity about how the United States is likely to put into action about some of the attitudes or change of attitudes, apparently, that President Trump expressed, for example, in Poland, right before the G20, about the future relations between Europe and the United States within NATO, for example. Do you think this time President Trump can be more specific about what the actions might be? Or this is another reaffirming trip to France about the previous stances of the United States, which is not likely to win him more popular votes in Europe, at least?
For a long time, I think the European Union needs United States more than the US needs European Union. You see, before President Trump arrived in Europe, G20, the European Union just verified the FTA with Japan. So they want to send a signal that even without TTIP, I have an alternative choice. So actually, intentions want to bring the US in the track of the negotiation TTIP, including this time of the climate change deal. I think the European Union still need the US because the European Union felt there are uncertainty, the relations with Russia, even they also felt the challenges from China and other emerging countries, particularly for the under the conditions of the Brexit. So United States, they came back to the United States and then to American first. European Union cannot European Union first or European first because European Union is very globalized. It's a multilateralism symbolically.
All right. Mr. Courmont, so it has to be successful.
Yeah, I would like to come back to the achievements that the two men can produce in the next 2 days. I think, first of all, Macron, let's face it, wants to impress Donald Trump. He wants to impress him about the fact that France is the main European military power, especially with the United Kingdom out of the EU. So that's why he invited him in this parade. They are going to talk security. They are going to talk fighting terrorism. They are going to address several issues where Paris and Washington totally agree, and therefore different fields where they can work very actively together. So that's the first thing. He wants to impress his guest about the capacity that France is capable of producing at the moment. I'll just remind you that in Africa at the moment, France is covering a zone that represents half the size of the United States, and it's fighting terrorism in this zone. And I think that Donald Trump understood in the past few months that making America great again is one slogan, but it has to be achieved with better, stronger alliances and with a better dialogue with its partners, especially on this sort of issue. So they're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
On the other side, Macron wants to convince, and he said that a few days ago, he wants to convince Trump about the Paris Agreement. He wants to have him back on track. I don't think he will succeed, to be honest with you. If he does, however, I believe that he will be the person of the year in Time magazine at the end of the year, and I wouldn't be surprised that he will be a very strong contender for the Peace Nobel Prize, just like Barack Obama back in 2009. But to be honest, he won't succeed there. But anyway, he wants to convince him, and he still believes he can convince Trump that it is in the best interest of the United States to stay a global actor and not to choose this exit strategy. So this is what they're going to talk about.
Well, you know, Mr. Courmont, if he succeeded really doing that, as you described, both of them, President Trump and President Macron, will be on the Time magazine cover for the year 2017, I guess. But putting that aside, you know, what you want to achieve and what you think once you achieve will winning respect from the others could be different from whether others would really provide you with the kind of respect and the amount of respect that you want. And I guess that's a very interesting question I want to put to you, Mr. Riecke. That is, France has this aspiration, but is what the beautiful calculation of President Macron likely to come into reality, particularly when it comes to other Europeans, how they're going to see France within the European continent? Is this going to change anything?
I mean, if his ambition is to be Man of the Year and have a Nobel Prize, he would make Donald Trump a bitter enemy, of course, because I assume the American president will see these two awards as in his own right. Sorry, that was a joke. I think currently there is a wave of support for Macron in France and in Europe, and there's a lot of hope, because obviously Germany and France are developing better ties, and it's about bringing a new narrative to Europe. It's about presenting the advantages of being in the European Union. Right. Germany's getting criticism for its trade surplus from France as well, and we need to come to terms with that. But I think this is a great opportunity now to think jointly about what the European Union should do. For that, I think it is very important that Macron succeeds in the economic reforms in France. This is a very, very tall order. People say, look, Macron, he will have no time for Europe or the rest of the world because he has all his hands full with reform in France. But even that would be good, because it would show that the European Union is actually an economic machinery that should not be underestimated. I think currently we should build on the positive mood that is now there, and Germany is absolutely willing to do that.
All right, Mr. Wang, Professor, I want to ask you about that. Okay, Germany, France, they are developing certain kind of friendship, and they see it as collective partners leading Europe for the future. But we don't want to forget, among countries between them, there is the competition. So how much of what is happening right now is President Macron trying to show to his German counterpart, see, I managed to do this, which you didn't eventually achieve. And how much will that provide President Macron with this bargaining chip, as President Trump would always like to use the phrase, in terms of its relationship with Germany and the leadership role within Europe?
Well, yes. Now, because of the Macron taking power, so Germany more self-confident. So there were Europeans who should be more independent from the United States, and European integration is to have a more bright future than before. But the cooperation between Germany and France is like this. The Germans took a low profile because it's for the Second World War problems, and then let the France take the leading role. But actually, the decisions made under the table is more the Germans' decision, and particularly in the economic issues. But France, given that the French security leadership in the European integration and even globally, not just in France, not just in Africa, but also in the Middle East.
That's right.
I think that President Trump will be maybe persuade France to take a more leading role in the security in Syria, in anti-terror. That's possible. Even Mr. Macron, his economic policy, for instance, some similarity with Mr. Trump, also has more job back and also protect the French interests. In this regard, they have some dispute with Merkel, because Merkel leading Germany the huge surplus and also free trade and also huge foreign reserve.
Right.
So felt the pressure from the United States as similar as China feels.
What do you think, Mr. Courmont? Is that really the potential likely?
There are a lot of expectations about Macron's reforms and Macron presidency in the rest of Europe. And therefore, there are certainly two different missions, two different tasks for him. The first one is to appear credible at the international level, as we have mentioned earlier, but the second one is to engage very quickly the necessary reform in order to catch up with the German economy, but also to strengthen the link between our two countries, which are extremely important and which indeed are crucial for the future of the European Union. So, of course, it is too early to know whether or not he will be able to succeed, and it will largely depend on the resistances that he will face. But what is certain is that inviting Trump, like he does, is a strong signal, not only that we don't want to leave the United States behind. That's a very important signal because, again, Donald Trump is not popular in European Union in general. But inviting him shows one very simple thing. Look, we may have disagreements with the current president, but we are strong allies and partners of the United States, and nothing fundamentally changes right there.
That is
the other strong signal is, look, we are an important actor, and when I say we, it's not France, it's European Union.
All right.
Someone has mentioned earlier the JEFTA agreement with Japan signed a few days ago, actually the day before the G20 summit. Look, we are defending free trade, and we will continue on this track. Are you joining us? Are you following us or not? It is your duty now, and this is where I have mentioned earlier that Macron is putting some sort of pressure over Trump's shoulders.
Well, President Macron could articulate it that way, but whether President Trump is going to receive it that way is a very different question. Therefore, I want to go to you, Professor Woodard. I mean, earlier you have very clearly brush off all kinds of importance your European colleagues try to put on this specific trip made by President Trump to France, at least from the European perspective. What is exactly this trip for President Trump? I mean, given that he does, at this moment, a lot of problems back at home. Going to France, is that going to free his spirit from all the troubles at home? Gaining a little bit more spotlight outside the United States, is it going to help with the 24 hours news cycle? Those, of course, are only shallow questions, not fake news questions, but shallow questions. Another question is, how exactly is the United States shaping its idea about what Europe means for the United States now and possibly in the near future? That is the fundamental question. Professor Woodard.
25 miles from this studio, 30,000 people are working for BMW producing cars in South Carolina. That is the major issue that Trump is concerned about working with Germany and working with Europe. It's primarily economic. He thinks we're making progress in that area, and he's really dismissive of the European Union. And I think that needs to be said, that the economy in the United States is surging, and Trump is getting credit for it. And he may not be popular in the polls, but he wasn't popular in the polls before the election. And who is going to displace him? I see no one displacing him. So while his attitude is kind of controversial, you have to think it's working politically.
All right.
And I don't agree that his popularity has to be good in Europe to be good here at home.
Okay. Well, I guess, gentlemen, all of you have expressed where you come from and what is likely to be the result of this trip. I want to thank all of you. Certainly a lot of interesting occasions to look forward to from now on. Wang Yiwei, David Woodard, Barthelemy Courmont, and Henning Riecke. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us.